Fun and parties don't happen because of alcohol. I love dancing, and I dance completely sober. I love going out to a comedy place and laughing till I'm crying, completely sober. And I love going to dinners with a group of people and having meaningful conversations that I remember the next day, completely sober.
Absolutely.
And I don't mind if people next to me are drinking. Like, you do you. That's completely fine. I'm not judging anybody else's choices. I'm just saying that it's not necessary to drink to have fun.
Welcome to another episode of The Irreplaceable Dental Assistant. And as usual, I have a surprise for you. This lady lights up the room. But Margy, I'm not going to tell them. I want you to share with my guests who you are and what you bring to the table.
Oh, thank you. I'm just so grateful to be invited to come along this podcast. So my name is Margy Schaller. I am the Chief Confidence Officer of my company, Laser Pointer Presentations. And in that role, I'm a speaker coach, and I help people who want to knock it out of the ballpark when they get onto a stage. But we're here to talk about a different role, and that is for a new company that my business partner and I, Laura Nelson, we started up called Sober Life Rocks, and I'm the COO of that company. Sober Life Rocks is a community-based membership program where we embrace people of all different flavors, whether they are people who are sober, people who are sober curious, people who are sober-ish, or what we call our sober wingmen, who are people who support the mission that we have of normalizing sober choices in the community.
Okay.
So that's a little bit about me.
Yep. Well, that's a lot about you. And I really feel that what we're going to talk about today is extremely important, because some people don't even know that they need to know. But here we go, right?
Yep, here we go.
So, Margy, can you share some of your personal journey towards sobriety and the events or the experiences that led you to embrace a sober lifestyle?
Absolutely. So I have to just take you back to the fact that I was raised by an alcoholic mother. My parents split when I was 8 because it was too tough for my dad to live in that sort of chaos. And, this is back in the early 70s. And even though he tried, the courts decided that it was best for kids to be with mom. So we were raised in a degree of chaos. That being said, I took my first sip of alcohol out of one of her drinks when I was around 8 or 9 years old. And I remember that burning sensation, and sort of the taste was disgusting. But then I remember the after effects going, ooh, I kind of like that. Mm-hmm. And I think like many people, I experimented with drinking. It got way too drunk on screwdrivers when I was in junior high and ended up throwing up all over the front yard, and did my share of the high school drinking and at parties. But I think it began to get a little bit different, both in college and in my 20s, where it was not just drinking in those social, fun things, but every day. I remember my first husband and he had a best friend who was a wine distributor. And so he was going to teach us all about the fine art of wine. And he would bring over 6 bottles, and he would wrap them in that brown paper wrap so that the labels would be disguised. And then we have tastings side by side of all these different wines. Now, never mind that the 3 of us would finish those 6 bottles of wine by the end of the day. But I looked at it as art But the reality is that I was drinking every day already in my 20s. And I don't think that I considered that to be a problem, because I dressed it up with these fancy dinners that I would make to justify this nice wine that I was having. Even to the point when that first husband and I split and I had toddlers on my own, I would still fix fancy meals for myself, steak and mushroom sauce, and serve that to my toddlers so that I could justify still having that wine, just me and the kids, because, I deserved it, right? At the end of that day. So fast forward then to almost 19 years ago, and my parents were watching things begin to get off the rails in my life. And they contacted somebody to help them how to approach me. And this was an interventionist, but he did things very differently. And this was what was so brilliant on their part. He set up basically an alcohol education weekend for our family. And they put my brother up to asking me to go, and another long story, but I ended up going. But what was really interesting was that he didn't come at it from, you're an alcoholic, you're bad. What he did was he said, I want to talk a little bit about the disease of alcoholism and the family effects of alcoholism. And he really taught them and me to see it through a different lens. I remember he said, and this is something I would really love sharing with people. He said to my dad, he said, do you understand what it is to crave alcohol? And my dad was like, I think so. I mean, intellectually I do. He said to him, do you drink coffee? And my dad was like, of course, every day.
Right.
And he said, have you ever reached up into the cabinet for that can of your coffee and brought it down and it's empty? And you have that moment of panic because your coffee isn't going to be there that morning. He said, that's a little bit what it's like for somebody who has the disease of alcoholism. That craving kicks in and all you can think about is, where's that next glass going to be?
Right.
And I remember my dad looking at him going, really? It's like that? And I looked at my dad and said, you don't know that? And so I think that an awful lot of people get accustomed to that expectation that at night they're going to break open the bottle of whatever it is. And when they don't have it, we all have that moment of, oh, I was really longing for, I really wanted. And when does that tip into a problem?
Right.
For me, it had.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news is I was able to, through that weekend, get to a place where I was ready to address it.
Okay, good.
And I agreed to go to a 30-day inpatient treatment center so that I could fully focus on that and not deal with being the single mom, not deal with working all the time. And in fact, at the end of that, I elected to do a second 30 days, but this time in a more residential program so that I could learn to go to the grocery store.
Right.
So that I could learn to go to a restaurant. So that I could learn to write my bills. Like anything that I had been doing with alcohol, I could learn to do without alcohol. And on February 7th of this year, I will be celebrating 19 years of sobriety.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That is awesome.
Thank you.
I know every day it's a decision. It's a choice. It's not just you have to be deliberate about how you decide to take charge of the day.
Just yesterday, I went to the grocery store and I was headed back towards the bread, and you have to go through the liquor aisle to get to the bread. And every time I do that, it's like, it's a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to know your thoughts. How do you suggest folk navigate their way through social events and gatherings where alcohol or such are prevalent while maintaining their commitment to sobriety?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I wish that I had all the answers. I can only share my experiences. So, my entire career has been working with speakers in one way or another, which has meant that I'm traveling to an awful lot of these conventions. But it doesn't have to be that. It also is the work party. Right? It is also let's a bunch of friends get together and go to happy hour.
Right.
And the challenge with those things is if you don't go to those, then you're just stuck with FOMO. Right. Then you're the antisocial person who never goes out with all the friends, or, cancels on a work party when you really should be there, or goes to a conference and you run to your room. So the trick is, how can we navigate that in such a way that it doesn't trigger us, right, and that we can still feel fully engaged as best as we can? I would say that the first probably 3 or 4 years in sobriety, it was tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was really hard. And one of the things that I always did was I had an escape plan.
Oh, yeah.
So I could go to those events, but I could also look at my phone and say, oh, I've got this call from my kids, got to step out. And then I would just leave and nobody would notice, right? If it was a large enough group. But at least I knew kind of that little trick. Going to some of these large dinners with 20 people seated at a table, if you're not drinking, it's a good hour before food actually arrives. Right? Because first the waiter or waitress goes around and orders all the beverage orders. It takes them another 15, 20 minutes to bring them all. Then they walk around and take all the food orders. And then it takes another half hour for that food to arrive. So if you're not drinking, you're sitting there quietly suffering for all that time. So one of the things that I've learned to do is that I have snacks in my room. And before I head out to one of those large gatherings, I eat something so that I'm not frantic by the time that the food comes. But I remember the days when I was drinking, I didn't mind because it was just a chance to tuck back and get started.
My mom always used to say, eat before you leave. Even if somebody invites you to dinner, because you never know how long it's going to take to be prepared. So this is another reason why her advice may have been golden.
Absolutely. And then I think the other thing too is to have in mind what you're going to say when somebody offers you a drink.
Right.
It's one thing when you're walking up to a bar at a conference or a waitress comes up to you, then you have free will to say, I'd like whatever the drink is. But what happens when you're at an event or a dinner and somebody says, hey, let's order wine for the table? And how can you exempt yourself from that without feeling like all eyes are going to turn towards you? And so one of the things that I've always done is just had whatever my favorite drink ready in my mind is, to say, you know what, tonight I'm going all in for my club soda and cranberry. Or to say, no, tonight isn't going to be a good night for me to drink. No, thank you. So that you don't have to say like, I'm sober.
Right.
You can literally just say tonight, fill in the blank. Right. And that takes a lot of pressure off of feeling like you have to justify anything.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you honestly, H2, when I got sober 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, things were different than they are today. We're so lucky that the conversation is beginning to change. and that people are beginning to be more accepting of people who choose not to drink for whatever the reason it is. We have celebrities now who are talking about not drinking. We have things like Dry January now where people take time off from drinking. So I think that it's getting easier than it was when I first got sober. But the trick is to know what you're going to say, to have that phrase in your head ready so that you're not deer in the headlights in that moment.
So always be prepared. So you're not going to wait until something happens and you panic trying to think how you're going to get yourself out of this thing. You already know what you're going to say. So are there any other effective strategies for managing not just that, but just daily triggers that might tempt someone to relapse?
What I have learned is that for most people, it's not actually the alcohol that's the problem. It's the stress.
Wow. That's eye-opening.
That when we are drinking, we are relieving or covering up some version of stress. And so my job for myself is to manage stressors.
I get that.
And if I'm already exhausted and I'm already hungry and I've been frustrated by something and somebody else comes at me with something that I don't know what to do with, and then I'm offered a drink, my brain, that fight or flight survival part of my brain, is screaming, now, yes, need something to cover all this. And it's harder to overcome.
You know what I like about what you've just said? What I've heard you say is it's important to be self-aware. Because if you understand how you're feeling in the moment and you think of ways to soothe that or to work through that stress or whatever, then you're not as pulled in to this soother, alcohol that you're accustomed to just succumbing to
That's exactly right. And so there's two ways to go about that. The first is to address those stressors up front. Make sure I don't get too tired. Make sure I don't get too hungry. Make sure if I'm frustrated with something that I stop and process that in the moment. Or I take 5 minutes in the bathroom to just sort of meditate and quiet myself. Or if I can't do those things, which there are days I can't do those things, I don't go somewhere that I'm going to be triggered.
Right.
I'm invited to go out with a bunch of people and I say, you know what, I'm just going to pass tonight. And I have done that.
So what that leads me to ask you about now is the importance of building supportive communities while you're pursuing sobriety so that you don't have to say, no, the group knows, hey, this is where we are. We don't necessarily do that and it's okay, you know?
Yeah. So I love this concept of building community. And before I dive into that, I want to share my own struggles with talking about my own sobriety.
Okay.
I made the decision fairly early in my sobriety that I was going to be completely open with my friends and my family and, you know, my community of people outside of work. But I didn't think it was anybody's business at work. And I think that, again, almost 20 years ago, there was still a lot more judgment about people who were sober. And it still persists today. Let's just be honest about that. But I think it's a little better. So I didn't tell anybody that I was working with that I was sober. And about 10 years in, I made the decision that I was going to share something about it with some people. And I had some people pull me aside after I had talked about it and say, you know, Margy, you might not want to do that. People might judge you.
Mhm.
And so I didn't again.
Mhm.
And what that has left me with is feeling very isolated at these professional events.
Right.
I just was having a conversation with somebody I've known for 10 years. I spent a weekend with doing some coaching at a condo. She went out and she asked me, like, what do you want to drink? She bought food and drinks for the condo. And I had told her, sparkling soda would be great for me, or sparkling water. And so I asked her just a couple weeks ago, I said, did you know all these years that I was sober? She said, I had no idea. Like, when you asked me for sparkling water, I thought, okay, but I had no idea that you were sober. It wasn't until literally just when we started Sober Life Rocks back in November that I made the decision that, you know what, I'm proud of my sobriety and I'm tired of being put in the corner by myself. I put myself in the corner because of this perception that I would be judged. So that was kind of the genesis of how Laura and I came to start Sober Life Rocks, that we believe that there needs to be community for people in professional settings, especially in dentistry. We're in a healthcare industry, for goodness sake.
Right.
Where people who, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, of all different flavors can come together and celebrate people having their own choices to make.
Right.
That networking shouldn't depend on what's in your cup.
True.
That fun and parties don't just happen because of alcohol. And so...
Pause there. You need to say that again. Honestly, because we are in a society where as our kids mature, they're like, welcome to the fun world.
Yep.
Drink, music, fun.
Yeah.
I really want you to underscore that point, please.
Yeah.
Listening.
Fun and parties don't happen because of alcohol. I love dancing, and I dance completely sober. I love going out to a comedy place and laughing till I'm crying, completely sober. I love doing funny, silly things. A girlfriend and I, we used to go to thrift stores and we would find wacky clothes and go off to a club and go dancing in these wacky clothes, completely sober. And I love going to dinners with a group of people and having meaningful conversations that I remember the next day, completely sober.
Absolutely.
And I don't mind if people next to me are drinking. Like, you do you. That's completely fine. I'm not judging anybody else's choices. I'm just saying that it's not necessary to drink, to have fun, to network.
I feel that we've been socialized to believe that the alcohol has to be a part of the fun experience, when what you've described is very similar to how I live my life. I have a wonderful time that doesn't include alcohol, and I don't feel lacking. And I think if our young people got that message early, they could choose to or not to, and it will be okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But that wraps me back to that question about community. So one of the things that I did choose to do, despite my silence about my sobriety, is that there are probably 4 or 5 people in my professional network that I did share that I'm sober with. And so when I would go to these big meetings and I would feel that anxiety rise, because I'm not naturally sort of an extrovert in large groups of people, I would walk right up to them and I would say, hey, can I just hang by you for a little bit till we kind of settle in? And they would just grab my arm and say, absolutely. And just wait with me till I got settled in. I have another girlfriend who, she asked me one time, she's like, what do you want to drink? I'm headed to the bar. And I said, well, I don't know, how about like a club soda with lime? And she looked at me, she goes, "Oh, girl, we can do better than that. Let's get you something fun to drink." And so when we got up to the bar, she was like, "What non-alcoholic things could you make for my friend that are fun?"
I love the twist to that.
Yes.
Love the twist to that. Because when you said it at first, I thought she was saying, "Oh, come on, you need to have a little alcohol." But really what she was giving you was the freedom to say, "Hey, there's so many other choices. Don't get stuck with that particular drink. Let's explore to see what else is available." I love that.
Yes. And so when we are willing to share with people that we choose not to drink, and you don't have to say why, when we're willing to share that, it opens the opportunity for somebody else to celebrate you and be there with you and for you in those alcohol-laden environments. And that was the piece that I want to really amplify and bring out for all the people there who do drink. Mm-hmm. Say, you can be part of making somebody's experience challenging or making it fabulous.
Right.
Because I have had those people who I've said, "I want a club soda," and they look at me, almost with just disdain. "Oh, come on, lighten up. Is that it?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's that?
They don't mean harm. They just, don't get it, to be honest with you. Sometimes they just don't get it. And that's okay.
I mean, I love my steak and potatoes. And so when somebody next to me orders like a salad, of course, I'm looking at them a little bit like, "Oh, come on." Right? So you're right. It's not always it's more that they want me to enjoy something the way they're enjoying something.
Correct.
But I think that we can do better in this day of inclusivity and making space for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've touched on this a little bit, but are there any specific habits or routines that you recommend incorporating into the daily life to help a sober mindset and prevent a relapse?
So I got sober in AA, and that is one very, very successful way to get sober, but there are many ways to get sober. But I think that some of the principles that I learned early on are things that have continued to serve me well.
Okay.
One of the things that they talk about is one day at a time.
Right.
But what does that mean? Mm-hmm. That means that for many people, myself included, the idea of quitting drinking forever was like facing the death of a loved one.
Right.
It was too much.
Right.
And so one day at a time simply means I'm just going to choose not to drink today. And I'll make that decision again about tomorrow.
Exactly.
Now, I took it one step further, and this is the tip that I want to share. Mm-hmm. I had moments when I said, "I don't know if I can get through tonight. So I'm just not going to drink for this 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And in 10 minutes, I'm going to decide again." And so I think, especially for people who are newly sober in some setting where it feels like you might drink, can you just make that decision for 10 minutes? And what I found was after 2 or 3 of those decisions, the urge had passed.
So here's what I'm going to say to that. I did an interview recently with Dr. Uche Odiatu, and what he said is it's so important to just celebrate the little steps. You don't have to wait until you've lost 150 pounds. If you made a decision today to have an apple as opposed to an apple tart, celebrate that. So I love the fact that you say, "I don't know about through tonight, but I know through the next 10 minutes you made it." Okay, so that gives you a little encouragement to say, okay, maybe I can try another 10 minutes. And as you said, after a while, it's like, well, maybe not I got this, but I can do it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Oh, I love that.
I think another really important thing about any big life choice is to have complete clarity around your why. Because moments will come and go, stressors will come and go, temptations will come and go. But if you always know what your North Star is, that will stay constant.
Yes.
Now, with these big life changes, people often say, oh, I did it for my kids, or oh, I did it for my career, or oh, I did it for my spouse, my partner. Challenge with that is those are all people. And as we know, people can just get under our skin and make us want to, read them the riot act. And that North Star might falter.
Yes.
So I believe that the strongest motivator is to find our why for ourselves.
Right.
Why am I doing this for myself? What about my life can I see that I want so badly that no matter what, I can always go back to that?
Exactly. Having that internal North Star is so much more effective than relying on people and circumstances. I get that. That. So what if someone is in a family or around friends who might struggle to understand accepting this new lifestyle change that you have? How would you suggest that my listeners work through that?
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to bring it back to starting with family, but extending it even into your work family. Because I believe that especially most dental practices function as their own functional or sometimes dysfunctional family, just like our families at home are sometimes functional and sometimes dysfunctional. I think if you have that North Star identified, if you have that internal reason why, that's the place to start.
Yeah.
And for me, going back to when I finally just made that decision that I was willing to get sober, my external life had a lot of chaos in it, things that were out of my control.
Right.
But the way I dealt with them was by piling more chaos into that. In other words, I was a single mom. Nothing I could do about that. But I made it much harder for myself with my own self-imposed chaos.
Right.
I had a very challenging relationship with the ex-husband. I couldn't change him, but I could change the way I dealt with it. So ultimately, my North Star, my why, became that I wanted to be able to live life with more focus, more clarity, more compassion, be a better mom, be a better ex-wife, be a better employee. So all these things weren't going to change, but I could bring a better me to it.
Right.
And so when I shared that with my friends and when I shared that with my family, they had seen all the chaos. They knew. And so when I said, I want to bring a better me to all of this stuff, they were like, how can we help?
Right. Exactly.
So it takes some vulnerability to say some of those things, but when you have that North Star identified, everybody wants to get around that.
You know what I love about what you just said? You allowed people to see who are already on Team Margy, how they could help to support you in a meaningful way that didn't have them saying, oh, come on, or what's the big deal? Or, they understood from your perspective, this is what I need you to do because I already know that you love me and you want to support me. this is how it's going to happen. And, it brings me back to what you said, the approach that gentleman who was leading the intervention took.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. Now they're not being judged. It's just you showing them a different point of view so that they can support you. Love that.
And I think the same would work for somebody listening who might be part of a dental practice. That if they shared with their coworkers, like, hey, things have gotten just a little out of control in my life, and I need to take a different approach here.
Yes.
So that I can bring a better me to this practice.
Mm-hmm.
Who wouldn't want to be behind that?
Correct. Because everybody needs you to be your best self so that the team can move forward cohesively, so you can be relied upon, so that they know that today is more than likely going to be a good version of you, because they're deciding to make sure that they support you in this way, if you know what I mean.
I do. And what's so funny is that, and maybe you can talk about this yourself, I think people are so afraid to go to their bosses and say, hey, I've decided to get sober, because then they might get fired. The reality is the firing might happen before that moment. But
I think that I would flip it. I think that if someone came to me and said that, it would say to me, this person is willing to take charge of their life. They're sharing it with me, and they've honored me by allowing me to go on the journey, because they could have kept it quiet and dealt with it on their own. But sharing allows me to be part of the healing. And I now, personalities are different, and circumstances in different offices change depending on the culture. But I think when I look at the world today, people are very willing to jump on a cause to help people elevate, regardless of who they are. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to create a more positive response than a negative response. Because, as you say, we were children of the 70s. We're evolved in how we think and see the world today versus back then. So I think it's a good thing, no matter how you decide to share that, to share it.
Yeah. But we're so afraid. I was so afraid. So many people I know are so afraid to say those words, because we're afraid that means people are going to know our dirty little secret. And the reality is, most of the time they already do.
Yeah, but
and what's exciting about that moment is then you get to claim this positive decision, this positive forward movement.
Yes.
As opposed to saying, I am a mess, you're saying, I am healing from being a mess.
You know what? I was going to say that part of the challenge is that when you say it out loud, now you really are not just holding it, but you're putting everybody else on alert to hold you accountable. And that takes courage. But thank goodness that you're able to get to that point. And as you say, community can certainly help you to move into that phase. And it can be, at the end of the day, something, oh my God, I'm so glad I did this. My life is so much better because I've done this. I've found my community because I've done this. And I realize that life is beyond the bottle, and it can be still so much more enjoyable, right?
Absolutely. And that's what we want. That's what we want out of Sober Life Rocks, is we're not there to get people to change how they drink one way or the other, but we do want to create a community of celebration, yes, of inclusion, of lifting each other up, regardless of what's in our cup. And so if anybody from your listeners has any questions or any interest in us, please check out soberliferocks.com and see if this is something where we can be part of your journey.
Great, because I was going to ask you if folks wanted to come along this journey, whether they are struggling or whether they have family members and wanted to know how to contact you. You shared that. That's awesome. Margy, this has been so great. Is there one quote that you could share with us? I love to ask my guests to share a quote that they live by or they celebrate.
Absolutely. Well, I wish I knew kind of who originally said this, but it's been kind of a mantra I've lived for most of my life. And that is, it's not what you do, but how you do it.
Yep. I love that. I love that. And as we just kind of summarize what we've said, I've come up with 3 words.
Okay.
Sober, safe, and secure.
Aww. I love those. I love those.
Margy, I need you to commit to promising me that you'll come and share at some point in time in the future again, because you have allowed so many people to listen to you, and through you gain some freedom to step out of a place that they may not have been able to step out of, or may not have thought that they needed to. Yep. Or may not have understood the need to support the friend, the mom, the dad, the aunt struggling with this challenge. So thank you for the liberation that you brought our guests.
Well, I will offer that I will give you a link that you can put in the show notes, that if somebody wants to book 15 minutes with me because they would like to know more, I'm more than happy to extend that to your listeners. This is so important to us. It's our passion project, and it is something that if we can help one other person feel part of a community, then that's what we're here for.
Well,
so thank you.
I was not expecting that, but I'm so grateful for your generosity. Thank you so, so much. It is such a gift when people choose to be vulnerable with us. And so I am just so grateful to Margy for just being real and just sharing her thoughts and her journey with us, and reminding us to embrace an idea one moment at a time, or one 10-minute segment of a time. Whatever it is that we think we can get through, let's just get through that. And then it gives us the freedom to push the envelope a little bit more for another 10 minutes. And before you know it, 10 minutes becomes an hour, becomes a day, becomes a week. Oh my goodness. One step at a time. And let's celebrate the small victories. You know, it's so important to recognize when you've achieved even the smallest of victories, because it gives you that rush to try it again and have it done again. And let's recognize that we need to have complete clarity around the why. And the why has to be a personal why. It can't be tied to a person beyond you or an event or an experience. It has to be your personal why. And how helpful is a supportive community? It almost feels mandatory. And that's why Sober Life Rocks can be such an integral part of the journey. Whether you are trying to be sober, or you know of someone who is trying to be sober and you want to support them, or you just see this as something that you want to be a part of, this community that supports and allows people on their journey to know that they can rock back on somebody, some community. And as Margy reminded us, it's not what we do, but how we do it. So, sober, safe, and secure. That's what we want to do. And if you are interested, wow, what a gift Margy gave us to schedule a 15-minute appointment with her. Look down in the link and see where you can find her and begin your journey today, either to freedom and liberation or to be a part of a supporting community. Whatever you bring to the table is just what they need. Listen, life is better when we live, learn, and grow together. If you have not, please subscribe to our channels and like it. See you the next time.